Good evening. This is Jennifer Signeri, and this is Workers' Comp Talk. I'm a board-certified workers' compensation specialist with Johnson & Groniger, and if this is not your first, or if this is your first time coming to an episode, Workers' Comp Talk is a labor of love for Johnson & Groniger. It is a live Facebook format that we're doing where we try to empower workers in the workers' compensation process by addressing workers' compensation law questions in a way that is straightforward, simple, and helpful. The format is always the same, but the topic changes from week to week. We'll be going ahead and talking about permanent partial impairment ratings in today's episode. And everyone is welcome to put questions into the comment section. Feel free to post your comments or questions here and make sure that you all can see. But anyway, before we get started, I want to give the obligatory legal disclaimer. What I will talk about today is legal information. It isn't necessarily meant to be specific legal advice for a given set of facts. If there is something that I discuss that piques your curiosity, leads to more questions, you all are welcome to give us a call, and I'll put our phone number up the bottom. You can also access our website, and we have a contact form, and we will call you so you can have your questions addressed in that way. So that's that. Today is lucky episode number 7, and we will be talking about permanent partial impairment ratings. I think a lot of folks who've had workers' compensation claims will eventually hear from somebody about a rating, and they have lots of questions about it. And my episode today will be covering 3 things. What is that rating? How is payment determined? Then when should you not take it? And then I'll wrap it up with a tip of the week. So first, what is a rating? And how do you get one? So the legal definition is permanent disability applies to permanent damage or to loss of use of some part of the body after the stage of maximum improvement from medical treatment has been reached and the condition is stationary. Okay, so what does that mean? Essentially, it means permanent impairment is that damage, that loss, that disability to that injury you had on the job. If you fell, on the job at work, onto your knee, you had to have surgery, that's the permanent impairment to your knee from having to undergo surgery. It's not the same as it was. And it's typically applied, this rating is typically applied at what's a stage called maximum medical improvement. And really, that just is really after the healing period. So after you've had your surgery, maybe after you've had physical therapy, after the doctor has done everything they can for you and has said, this is, I think, the most I can do for you, you can expect that things are going to, for the most part, stay about the same right now. And usually it's applied at maximum medical improvement because if you apply it too early, there's an argument that you might improve with some treatment, maybe some more physical therapy. So typically it's applied at the time that the doctor is getting ready to release you at maximum medical improvement. And under North Carolina workers' compensation law, it's the physician that rates injuries according to the percentage of impairment of the affected body part. There is a rating guide online on the North Carolina Industrial Commission website. I was just looking at it 2 seconds ago. But essentially the final rating of impairment is entirely that examining doctor's independent opinion. It's based on their knowledge, their experience, their clinical observations, evaluating you. But there is that rating guide online, and it's on the North Carolina Industrial Commission website, which is the state agency that oversees workers' compensation claims. I was just looking at it. If you go on to the North Carolina Industrial Commission website, and it's listed actually under the attorney's page. There's an injured workers page, but this one's listed under the attorney's page. There's a section called the rating guide. And maybe because attorneys are the only ones who are really interested in trying to decipher what it means. But you go on the rating guide and you scroll down a little bit and you'll start to see some discussion about percentages for injured body parts. And it's got some interesting information in there, including, for instance, that, there's a 40% rating for a total knee replacement with optimal results. So if you kind of want to get an idea of what are suggested ratings, and again, this rating guide isn't the end all to be all for doctors. Really, they can use their independent judgment. That's something interesting to look at. So this rating, it's assigned at maximum medical improvement. It's assigned by the doctor, and it's assigned as an indication of permanent impairment for the injured body part you had sustained, on the job from this work-related injury. So second, how do you determine what you were paid after you were assigned a rating? So after you're assigned a rating by a doctor to the injured body part, that percentage is then cross-referenced with the Workers' Compensation Act to determine compensation. So essentially, that percentage, the 5%, 10%, 15%, whatever it's going to be, will equate to an amount of workers' compensation checks that somebody will get if they return to work. It's confusing, and I'll try to break it down. So there is actually something called North Carolina General Statute 97-31. And it looks like this. And it's, believe it or not, it is a statute, North Carolina statute, which is under the Workers' Compensation Act of North Carolina. And it says things like, for the loss of a leg, 66 2/3% of the average weekly wages during 2 weeks. And and then it has the hand, the arm, foot, leg, fingers, and it breaks it down, the number of weeks maximum that somebody will be paid if they receive a rating. So for instance, in that example with the leg, there is a maximum of 200 weeks that the statute will apply for the loss of a leg, a complete loss of a leg. So if a doctor, say, assigned a 40% rating for a total knee replacement, then that 40% rating would be 40% of 200 weeks, which is 80 weeks. And the statute talks in terms of 66 2/3% of your average weekly wage is what you'll be paid. So 40% of 200 weeks at the 66 2/3 of the average weekly wage, which, by the way, is your workers' compensation check rate anyway. So whenever you get a rating, you will be paid according to the maximum number of weeks. It'll be cross-referenced according to the maximum number of weeks for the injured body part. And again, using that example with the total knee replacement, 40% of 200 weeks is 80 weeks of workers' compensation checks. If you get like a 10% for your back, that is 10% of 300 weeks, which the statute will references as well, and that is 30 weeks of workers' compensation checks. It is available online. North Carolina general statutes are all available online. So it's North Carolina General Statute 97-31. Your eyes will sort of glaze over because it's a lot of legal speak. And I think that the takeaway is the number of weeks, because you can usually figure out what the percentage is if the doctor will tell you. And then you can figure out the number of weeks of workers' compensation checks that equates to. So that's how the payment is determined. But then we have a comment. What if I injure two body parts? Are the weeks added together? Yes, they can be absolutely added together. And that's a great question, because it's not always as clean as, you injured your leg and only your leg. You sometimes have an injury to your arm, you have an injury to your knee. And if you can manage to return to work, you will get paid for all the ratings. And as long as all the ratings have reached maximum medical improvement. So that's something to be mindful of, and it's a good question. That's the amount that you can expect to receive. But when should you not take a rating? Well, it sounds great in theory that you're going to be compensated for this injured body part, but there are times when you shouldn't. You should really think about the rating before you actually take it. Usually, if you are getting a rating, it implies that you've had some sort of injury, maybe it required surgery, and you've had actual damage. There's a possibility that you had some permanent restrictions that came from the injury, and there's a possibility that you may or may not be able to go back to doing the job that you were doing before you got hurt. So when should you not take a rating? You should not take a rating when there's that possibility that you can't go back to work. And the reason why you shouldn't take that rating is because the law, the Workers' Compensation Act, will require you to choose your most, and this is a legal term of art that's used in the cases, your most munificent remedy, which basically means you got to choose the best option. And your options are, once you've reached the end of the healing period, is you continue to get workers' compensation checks or you get your rating. And you will not be entitled to the rating unless you can go back to work and be able to do something, earning what you were earning before. Or that's ideally. And I know the Industrial Commission, when reviewing these rating payments, they'll be looking to see that you can go back to that job. And the reason for that is that if you can't go back to doing the job that you were doing, then you possibly will need to be on workers' compensation checks, possibly for longer than 80 weeks, which is a 40% rating. The maximum number for most folks is going to be 500 weeks. That's what the statute the maximum number of workers' compensation checks you can get, which is about 9 years. So when should you not take the rating? You shouldn't take the rating when there's a real possibility that you're either not going to be able to do the job you were doing because you need those workers' compensation checks to cover you, or you're going to have some difficulty. So one of the things to be mindful of is that you can wait. You don't have to necessarily to take the rating as soon as it's signed. You can go ahead and there's a trial return period called of 9 months. You can wait. You can wait to see if you can do your job if you want to try. I mean, there are risks associated with that. You might get hurt again. There might be a difference of opinion about whether or not you really should be able to do the job. Your employer might be saying you can. You might be arguing, no, I can't. I mean, I have these restrictions, so you're not complying with them. But if you still really want to do your job, you don't have to take the rating. You can go ahead and say to the insurance carrier, listen, I know I have a trial return to work period of 9 months. I want to wait 9 months. I want to make sure that I can do the job before I take my rating. And that way, you don't risk taking a rating and then you've chosen your best option, workers' compensation checks or your rating. You're not foreclosed, you're not cut off from going back to taking the workers' compensation checks. You haven't chosen your most munificent remedy yet. So it's a good idea, even though there's a temptation to want to be compensated for, having been injured on the job, it's a good idea to not rush it. It's a good idea to make sure that you've evaluated all of your options. You make sure you can go and do your job that you were doing before. And even then, wait the 9 months, make sure there's no difficulty, no needing to be back out of work. And there's also the option, something to do during this period of time, there's the option to get a second opinion on that rating. A lot of folks aren't aware that just because you're assigned a rating by the workers' compensation doctor, that you can go out and choose a doctor to give you another rating. If you have a sense that maybe that workers' compensation doctor wasn't listening to you, maybe didn't listen to all of your complaints about pain or restrictions, you can go and ask for a second opinion, which the insurance carrier will be required to pay for under the law, and say, I want a second opinion on my rating. I think that this other doctor missed some things. And it's possible that another doctor because it is such a subjective thing, as possible, another doctor will assign a higher rating. And then maybe a 40% rating will turn into a 45% rating. And because the insurance carrier pays for it, it's worthwhile. It's not much that you're losing. It is a good idea not to ask for that second opinion unless you're pretty sure that you will get a higher rating. But that's something to do during that 9-month period if you return and you're sure that you want to stay in your work and wait. So it's always better to wait until a trial return to work is over, which is 9 months. That way you can, not close off the option of needing to get workers' compensation checks, because once you do get that rating, you'll have only 2 more years to get more medical treatment. It will be really difficult to get workers' compensation checks. It's a good idea to not rush the rating. So, tip of the week. Something to be mindful of is that when you are approaching being released by the doctor, that's usually a good time to talk to the doctor, because they're probably the most receptive to this discussion towards the end of your healing period. And talk to them about the kind of work that you did before you got hurt, your injury, the kind of problems you're having now, and whether or not you should have any concerns about going back to work, about needing to go back out again, maybe finding another job. That will help you figure out if you should be looking, to continue with workers' compensation checks as your best remedy or a rating. Some folks I talk to say that they love their job, they love the people they work for, it's good money, they want to get that rating. I still encourage you, write down the date that you go back to work, keep track of the 9 months. So that's my tip of the week. And that's all for now on today's episode. If you have questions, feel free to post them in the comment. I'll be happy to answer them after today's broadcast. But this is Jennifer Signieri again with Johnson & Groniger, and I'll see you next time.